It's hit 3:45. I think we're ready to go. I literally said that as you took a drink. Go for it.
We are going to start with a little bit of a test. Okay, so hopefully you see me and only me on the right, and you then see something on the left that looks like an H. Okay, and
shut up, nigga.
Oh, we've got a Zoom bomber already. You can take care of that, Scott.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh boy. Okay, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Maybe that was a bad idea on my part. Hold on one second, guys. Let's just take care of that real quick.
That's you. That's all taken care of, all right?
Okay, very good. I just need to make one quick change real fast to myself. And what would be a Zoom meeting without a few Zoom bombers, I guess. But if this continues to happen, then I'll just feel really, really bad about it forever and ever and ever, I suppose. Let me get this back to HyperX and back to here.
Right, hang on a minute. Ben's having a bit of a wobble about making sure we've got everything coming out. What do you need, Ben?
Whatever is reconfiguring for people to see.
Yeah.
I need it in a way that I can just kick it on the stream. So
he wants to be able to stream it.
No. I want it. Sorry, not.
Come and talk to him. Come round. I'll be the messenger.
Sorry, I'm tripping over the many boxes. I was just wanted to make sure that everything will be
good. I'm looking at your stream.
Right.
Looking at your stream.
Excellent. Cool.
You're good.
No. That looks like it's streaming right. That looks excellent. Cool.
I just need you guys to tell me if you can hear the audio.
It may or may not work to see how you're seeing it here, but if you can pass recorder rights, I'd like to ask her to record this just in case, because I want to see it. I want to make sure it's presented how you'd like it presented, basically.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, tell me if you guys can hear the audio in this movie.
Now,
yeah,
I have been told the best crackers in the world in 60 minutes.
Yeah, but you're very, you're low on voice.
Great, not. Go.
How about that? Is that better?
Yeah, that's absolutely better.
I have to access the system.
Okay, this is our little intro movie, and then I'll begin, okay?
Just accessing the system. Angela, I have access to system.
She was murdered, and we believe it might have to do with whatever it was she was trying to access from your system.
I just got access to the system.
How the hell did you access this system?
A recent unknown intruder penetrated using a super user account, giving him access to our whole system.
Okay, Marshal. Do whatever it takes to break that encryption.
This may just be what we need to break the encryption.
They did manage to break the uplink downlink encryption.
They're paying hackers to break the encryption.
Once we break the encryption, how long before they break your encryption?
An encryption like a code?
Yes, ma'am.
2 different systems of encryption.
Encryption I've never seen.
Somebody asked for my encryption key.
That's not uncommon, is it?
No, but then they asked for a higher level of encryption.
To get root access to a Python web server, expose its SSL encryption, and then intercept all traffic over its secure port.
I don't think Morse code is going to break the encryption.
Your efforts to break the encryption codes will not be successful.
We haven't had any luck breaking the encryption.
Sir, we've made progress breaking the encryption.
Within seconds of breaking Charles' encryption.
But as soon as you break the encryption, you find me.
Yes, sir.
There's someone trying to download a file right now. Who? Carrie.
Yeah, I know. Carrie, how it goes.
No, the other Carrie, Zeps. Downloading the file, slowest speed possible.
Downloading the file right now.
Download the files.
Can't we just download his files?
And I'll download the files.
We are downloading all files.
I cannot allow you to download my files.
Downloaded a file illegally?
Hugo downloaded the files before he got shot.
He downloaded a file.
He downloaded a file.
And then I downloaded a file.
You got 30 seconds to download that file. You copy? Download your file.
Downloading secure files.
Yes.
Listen, that thing has just uploaded a virus.
Okay, so let's upload a virus.
We've uploaded the virus.
So upload the virus now.
Upload the virus.
I uploaded the same virus.
And I'll upload a virus. Unfortunately, I'm going to need the mainframe security code, which is tattooed on the king's lower back.
Sir, he's uploading the virus.
Everything but the virus.
I gave it a virus. Computer virus. It works like a computer virus.
It's a computer virus.
A hacker planted the virus.
Okay, this is what we want. If you guys are getting paranoid and logging off the network.
Logging off.
Just logging off.
Please log off.
Don't forget to log off now.
Now, there's 113 movies that were in there, and if you can name them all, then you're going to win the pub quiz that we're doing right after this, but before YT Cracker comes on to play for his set. So, I'm Ray Redacted. This is the complete history of hacking and freaking. Some of you may have seen the first half of this a few months ago at a charity fundraiser we were doing for the Mini Hats Club. Let me tell you, instead of getting into a big thing about who am I with regards to CVEs and certifications and colleges and universities and jobs and all that crap, okay, I'd like to tell you what stickers are on my laptop. The stickers on my laptop are a fantastic logo that Scott McCready made me for the InfoSec Happy Hour that says Ray Redacted on it. By the way, I was not born with that name, Ray Redacted. I just want to clarify that because my mom is on the call. That was not my actual born name. I also launched Tribe of Hackers podcast recently. So that's a brand new podcast based on the Tribe of Hackers books. Active in Diana Initiative, Mental Health Hackers, Mini Hats Club, and then brand new, I just became an ambassador to an organization called Hacking is Not a Crime. But you don't want to hear about me. You want to hear about the complete history of hacking. Now, kind of painfully, one of the beer farmers started this because 2 years ago, Ian Thornton Trump, Fat Hobbit, actually made fun of a company marketing the 5th generation cyber threats. And Malware Jake, somebody I have enormous respect for, said, I'll see that 5th and give a 6th. And I'm just kind of going, uh-oh, because I'd already been at Black Hat talking about 5 generations of hacking and freaking, and that's what we're going to talk about. But before we even get to that first generation, before we even kind of talk about the first generation, this is mostly a UK audience. And before there were ever hackers, there were proto-hackers. There were people that would be hackers if we had the term hackers. And one of my favorites is a woman, and her name was Ada Lovelace, and she lived in the 19th century, the early 19th century, and she was basically the first ever computer programmer. She was the first person to realize that you could use machines not just for calculation, but also for analytics. And also, she was our first tech visionary. Now, another one that was a proto-hacker, of course, is Alan Turing. He was a cryptographer. He invented the logic engine. He was basically the father of computer science and AI. And unfortunately, he was the first of many, many people in our industry that ultimately ended their own lives. And we're going to talk about mental health and the history of that. But at the end of the day, Alan Turing was treated very, very badly and ultimately decided to end his own life rather than suffer chemical castration. But when we talk about hackers, that actual term hackers, we always start at MIT. Now, specifically, it was Building 26. Building 26 was a building on campus that was slated to be torn down. And when a building is slated to be torn down, people typically do crazy stuff in it before it gets torn down. And it turned out a bunch of MIT students and then professors started building model railroads, the TMRC, the Tech Model Railroad Club. And these were super sophisticated railroads. And they had computing to them. They had switching. If you think about all the stuff that happens with packet switching, cars going in and out of a lot of rails was very, very similar, right? It was also a drinking club. So they were the first drunk hackers, so to speak, right? They engaged in something called midnight requisition, which was you'd go out after midnight to borrow equipment from other science labs, from other universities, and eventually from the phone company. They went and got tandem switches because they were really good at moving trains in and out. Now, at MIT, some of the grandfathers of all AI and hacking were professors, right? One was Marvin Minsky. He was the director of the AI labs. Alan Kotok, who wrote Space War, and John McCarthy, who actually created Lisp, and many, many more. But in April 1955, the minutes, okay, so you young people don't know this, but they used to write minutes of every meeting, right? The minutes of the meeting for the TMRC actually said, Mr. Eccles requests that anyone hacking on the electrical system turn the power off to avoid fuse blowing. Which, by the way, That's actually really good advice. But it's the first time we've ever heard the term hacking. And then it became known as anything you could do to make a shortcut, right? To shorten a process, creatively think of ways that A is supposed to be able to do B, but create it to do C and D as well, right? And one of the biggest ones there was code bumming. So if you had a punch card program that was 14 cards long, and you wanted to run it right away, you could find a professor that had a 300 punch card program, and if you optimized his code down to 280, you could sneak yours in and run it as well. That was actually known as code bumming, and it was really ultimately the first hacking, right? It was bypassing systems, it was optimizing code, right? And they also wrote down some of their, I want to call it an ethos. And some of this ethos you'll recognize from hacker ethos today. Number one was information wants to be free. How about that, right? Mistrust authority. Everybody should have access to computers, and they can create beauty. So this tiny little group of people is inventing hacking. They're the proto Jedi. Everything is actually happening there. And then one day, everything changed. At 7:28 p.m. specifically, on October 4th, 1957, the world completely changed. And the reason that the world completely changed is because America's arch enemy at the time, the Soviet Union, put a little satellite into space called Sputnik. And it wasn't necessarily the fact that they could put a satellite in space that caused America to freak out. It was the idea that they could have also put a bomb into space as well, right? And so collectively, all of the folks in the United States completely panicked and passed certain laws and regulations, one of which was DoD Directive 5105.15, which created, this was the act that actually created DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Now, DARPA did a bunch of things, a bunch of defense things. But one of the things they did was Project MAC. And everybody argued about what MAC stood for because certain people said it was multiple access computing and others said machine-aided cognition. I guess it depended on where you were, but it ultimately was about building communities and bulletin boards and email service. And guess what people started exchanging? They started exchanging software, and also tricks about hacking as well. So if you've ever seen this before, this is what it looks like. It actually looks like the original ARPANET backbone, the UUNet, if you would even know that name as well. So this is generation one. There's no profit motive, There's pure curiosity, there's innovation, and there's ingenuity. And at this point in time, there's no reason to have any cyber defenses, So we don't need that, right? So here we are, university environment, now multiple university environments, and that same sense of curiosity and the desire to explore spills over into the next logical place where you can explore computers, which actually, if you think about it, was the biggest network of computers outside of the ARPANET, the PSTN. That's the public switched telephone network. And it could probably be best epitomized by this.
Switchboards were replaced by mechanical systems. Different noises were used to trigger the switches. If you had perfect pitch like blind phone freak Joe and Grecia, you could whistle calls through the network.
Let's see if I make it this time. This is really hard to do. It sounded like all the tones were present, so the phone should be ringing about now. Okay, it hit the phone. It just takes a little while.
He even showed off his skills for the local media.
From his one phone to a town in Illinois and back to his other phone, a 1,000-mile phone call by whistling. Joe Ingresia says he used to do these things because he is fascinated by the technology.
Now, he was fascinated by the technology, right? But he actually became known as Joy Bubbles. He eventually legally changed his name to Joy Bubbles. He started at 4 years old listening to the phone system. And Joe Ingresia was legally blind. He was a ham radio enthusiast. And it turned out that what the kids would do back then was blind kids would go to summer camp every year, right? Summer camps for blind kids. And they wanted to keep in touch with each other throughout the rest of the year. And so they figured out ways to whistle and take control of phone systems, right? And it spread like wildfire. This became known as the Age of Freaking, and it's spelled with a PH as a pun, okay? And it was mainly attacking North America Bell, right? But it was also tied in to the counterculture, specifically the yippies, the yipples, the hippies, right? There was a guy by the name of Al Bell that hung out with another person named Abby Hoffman, and they kind of had an interesting take. So not only were they a little bit rebellious and anti-authority, period, but at the time, the Vietnam War was financed almost entirely by telecommunication taxes. So they felt like it was not only your right to steal from the phone company, it was your moral duty because you were stopping the Vietnam War, which they felt like was not a legitimate war. So they started publishing these zines teaching people how to steal phone service, right? The very first one tells you how to generate anybody's calling card from anybody's number whatsoever. But freakers are more known, especially if this is going to be a trivia question, not necessarily for carding, but for the boxes, okay? There were 17 or 18 different colored boxes. One of those was a red box that would basically generate coin tones so it could fake what you were doing at a payphone. There used to be these things called payphones, guys, okay? And you used to put these things called quarters in them. And the red box would actually generate a tone that would sound like a quarter, a dime, or a nickel. And this is what would happen. You would walk up to the payphone, you would pick it up, and then you would this is the noise it would make, okay? And if you had an operator on the line, she might generate you like $3 or $4 back or whatever else. It was that simple because the coin tones were in-band signaling. In-band signaling, meaning the actual data is in the same carrier as the rest. Now, people don't really talk about red boxes that much, except for maybe certain people my age that may have actually... Anyway, everybody always talks about the blue box because it turns out that the phone system had in-band signaling too. And 2600 hertz was a very, very specific tone that would allow you to grab a trunk and take it over, okay? And you could make free long-distance calls. You could do emergency breakthroughs. You could do all kinds of amazing stuff as an operator, especially if you had a female companion that could help you by social engineering. Because you could get a hold of an operator, make it look like you were on a tandem, right? And then do three-way calling, interrupt people. Steve Wozniak very famously called, I think it was the Pope, and woke him up, right? And these were nothing but little boxes that were generating these tones analog, that 2600 hertz tone, okay? And these are in the museum and everything else like that, but we relied on the fact that SS5, Signaling System 5, used in-band signaling, okay? Then Esquire magazine in October 1971 published this little article called Secrets of the Little Blue Box. Now, the author pretended like he wasn't talking about a real device, this box you could buy for $300 US that would allow you to do all these things, okay? He made it sound like it was fiction, but when he published it, one guy in particular got a hold of this magazine and started reading it, and then this is what happened.
Well, as I was talking to Steve Jobs on the phone, I said, it occurred to me that, wait a minute, they're giving too much information about certain frequencies and certain codes. There's too much information here. This doesn't sound right for a fiction. And so we decided to go check some of it out. So on a Sunday, we went to, where's a technical library you could sneak into on a Sunday? Well, we picked the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. No question. You go to any of these places, in the high research, the very pure theoretical research type places, and boy, I'll tell you, there's no such thing as a closed door or a locked door. So we always found our way in. And we'd go up to the library and read all the computer magazines every week, and we found a book on the telephone system, and it had the same frequencies that were mentioned in this article that was called fiction. And we looked at each other and realized that we had stumbled onto something that was not fiction.
Of course, that's Steve Wozniak. Now, Wozniak was an engineer's engineer, right? Brilliant guy, right? He was actually kind of a hacker, right? The things that he could do, with the circuit board and soldering and everything else like that. But he was only half of the equation, right? So he's the one actually that's figuring out how to do it. But in every major organization, there's typically engineering and then there's sales.
One of the things that Woz and I did was we built blue boxes. They were devices that you could build. You know, when you make a long-distance phone call in the background, you hear doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Those are the telephone computers actually signaling each other, sending information to each other to set up your call. There used to be a way to fool the entire telephone system into thinking you were a telephone computer and to open up itself and let you call anywhere in the world for free. And these were illegal, I have to add. But in spite of that, we were so fascinated by them that Woz and I actually figured out how to build one. We built the best one in the world. It was the first digital blue box in the world. But it was the magic of the fact that two teenagers could build this box for $100 worth of parts and control hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure in the entire telephone network in the whole world. That was magical. And experiences like that taught us the power of ideas, the power of understanding that if you could build this box, you can control hundreds of millions of dollars worth of telephone infrastructure around the world. That's a powerful thing. And that, if we hadn't have made blue boxes, there would have been no Apple.
There would have been no Apple. And these little boxes, these Wozniak boxes, were really well made. They even had a warranty, even though it was an illegal device. It came with a money-back guarantee if you opened it up. One of the trivia questions is, what did it say on that slip of paper in there? And of course, they're worth, $25,000 today if you get a real one. But if you think about it, that little box allowed them to take control of the entire phone system. And then they ended up inventing the iPhone, which is a lot smaller, but basically allows you to take control of the entire phone system, right? And so here we are. It is now a point in time where people can buy blue boxes, either cheap knockoffs from your local bookie or some kind of person in the mafia, or really good digital ones from Wozniak, right? And the phone company started to notice, but it was less than 1% of their total billing, because phone calls used to be really, really expensive, and this was just a flies now, right? So it wasn't in mainstream at all, okay? And it might have remained that way until one day, General Mills changed the equation. Now, for the young folks out there, I should explain. We used to buy cereal that had toys in every box. There was a toy, and you would just dig your hand, dirty or not, to get the toy out. And General Mills decided that a good toy would be a boson whistle. And it turns out that the whistle that General Mills sent 12 million out could generate the 2600 hertz tone. So teenagers all over the place could grab these tones, and the first prank they would pull is if they walked by a bank of phones, like everyone's on the pay phones at the airport, you could blow it and it would knock everyone off because they would immediately go into operator mode, right? But then eventually everybody started learning, what does that tone mean? What can I do? Oh, this is fantastic. Oh, let's set this up in my dorm, right? And it was popularized by a guy by the name of John Draper. He changed his name to Captain Crunch, but he cruised around in his hippie van talking about this, okay, and popularizing it on pirate radio. And he also met the blind freakers and basically, depending on who you ask, either exploited them or embraced them. And that's all I'm going to say about John Draper, period, because we don't consider him part of the InfoSec community anymore. Additionally, Ian Murphy came along, and he felt like it was unfair for Bell to charge different rates for daytime and nighttime. So he programmed every phone switch in America with a default password, okay, so that it always treated every call like it was 3 a.m. Basically ripping off billions of dollars from the phone company, and they didn't even know how to undo it, right? We also had Kevin Paulson, who went by Dark Dante. He's now a legitimate writer. Red Box Chili Pepper, who was a member of the Cult of the Dead Cow, wrote for 2600 and PLA. But what we would do, what the freakers would do, was exploring the phone system using things like beige boxes, which was basically like a lineman's handset, doing sweep tones, war dialing, looking for all of these special numbers so that you could eventually get to what was called the simultaneous seizure trick. okay? And that would basically allow you to do all kinds of wonderful things, or all kinds of tricky things to phone numbers, okay? You could also look for sweep tones, ringbacks, ABNs and ARNs, which are still very useful today. If you're hunting a scammer, it's great to have an always busy number or an always ringing number if you want to leave it for somebody, right? The phone company has those too, but what we were always looking for were loops and bridges, okay? And a loop and a bridge were two different ways that you could connect multiple phone calls. So one person could call Chicago, another person could call Europe, and then you could bridge it basically together. And what's funny about that is that in the deviant psychology book about behavior, they talk about how obsessed freaks were with looking for this so that they could do conference calls with total strangers, right? And ultimately, that's really ironic because a lot of these freaks grew up to become InfoSec professionals, and we hate conference calls, right? Spending hours and hours and hours looking for these special bridge numbers that you could do that. Now, not surprisingly, Bell was not happy when every teenager in America could do this. And so the third generation defense they came up with, which is actually still in use today, is SS7. Okay, signaling system 7 took the in-band communication, took it out of band, added some really crappy basic authentication mechanisms, right? And the problem is, it is insanely insecure. We're going to talk about the UK voicemail hacking and how that relates to SS7, how SIM hijacking relates to SS7, but ultimately SS7, just like the first protocols of the internet, assumed that the people participating were trusted parties, right? So if somebody passed you a certain piece of information, you just kind of assumed, why would they possibly give me the wrong number, what they're calling from, right? Or something like that. But it was electronic switching systems, and it shut down blue boxing literally like in a month, right? A lot of the actual calls, when they show when they went to SS7 by country, you can actually see the call volume dropping country by country by country. So we're now talking about the third generation. And the third generation is defined kind of in the period of 83 to 85, because a ton of stuff happened in 1984. 4 or 5 major historic events happened. But the one I think had the biggest impact, period, and it's not just because I happen to be an adolescent for 12 years old at the time, was in 1984, this happened.
What are you doing?
Dialing into the school's computer. They change the password every couple of weeks, but I know where they write it down.
And a promising student.
Hi.
An old game.
Hi.
With an electronic twist.
Are those your grades?
Yeah. I don't think that I deserved an F. Do you?
You can go to jail for that.
Only if you're over 18. This computer company is coming out with these amazing new games in a couple of months. And I want to play those games. Wow.
What?
We got something.
He found the right code word to play the game.
We're in.
But it was the wrong computer.
Now, that of course is War Games, right? And it actually had some accurate stuff in there. One of the things it showed was that when you had a modem and you wanted to find other modems, you would dial every single number in an NPA and XX, okay, either sequentially or randomized, and that was known as war dialing. Okay, that became known as war dialing. There's also a crappy demonstration of how to payphone freak. He didn't use a red box, he used like a little tone, right? But even the name of the conference, DEF CON, was a play off of Defense Condition, right? But it also showed kids, I mean, most of you caught that, right? Because I blared it out, that if you're under 18, you're not going to get prosecuted, right? You can do whatever you want. Go look for games. Go break into computers. Why not? But that wasn't even the biggest impact it had, because it also told a bunch of 12-year-old and 13-year-old boys with Commodore 64s or Apple IIs or maybe their parents' computer that if you hack, you can get laid. Because in the movie, Matthew Broderick got the girl as a result of his hacking activity, right? And this led to thousands and thousands and thousands of people trying to connect bulletin board systems, both locally and long distance, okay? Side note, by the way, I've never actually told this story, but I'm going to today. About 3 weeks after War Games was released, the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, watched the movie because they have a theater in the White House, right? They have a private theater. And he watched the movie and he was scared to death. So he called together all of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of his main cabinet secretaries, and this is what happened.
And says, has anybody seen this movie War Games? Nobody'd seen it. It just came out. He goes into this enormous plot description. People are looking around, wondering where this is going. Then he turns to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Vesey, and says, General, could something like this really happen? Could someone just break into our most secure computers? And the general says, I'll look into that, Mr. President. He comes back a week later and says, Mr. President, the problem is much worse than you think. This leads to the government's first presidential directive on computer security.
Of course, the first directives and the first laws were badly written, right? This is the first time we got into that pattern where it was punitive, it didn't make sense. It was an overreaction, right? They didn't consult people that actually knew security, right? But in this time frame, something else happened. Because the year 1984 was the year George Orwell had predicted everything was going to go away. And so suddenly we started to see publications pop up, right? Like 2600, which is the Hacker Quarterly, right? Which is still published today, right? You still get that every 3 months. And of course, it's named after the 2600 hertz tone, right? You could get FRAC, right? FRAC is still published today, kinda. But you can still contribute to FRAC or 2600 if you want to. And then there were text files, okay? Text files, G files. That was one of the reasons why you dialed these BBSs, which were always busy. Their phone numbers were always busy. Oh, I forgot to even tell you this. A lot of the BBSs were like kids, and they were using their mom's phone line like after 10 p.m. So like in the BBS listing, you couldn't call until after 10 p.m. Like literally that would happen. But ultimately what you wanted when you got to that BBS is you wanted access to the HPP sections. That was the hacking, freaking, and piracy sections. Now, they didn't just let anybody into that particular area. You couldn't just walk up, okay, and say, hey, I want to get access to that, because this is where they held the boxes plans, right? This is where you could get, I think, the Anarchist Cookbook, right, which seems a little archaic now by today's standards. So in order to do that, you had to demonstrate that you were elite. And the way that you did that was by showing that you knew the language, okay? That's elite speak. That's writing things in numbers. This is actually an alternate glyph alphabet that's designed to reflect in-group or out-group status, right? And this remains today. If you've ever wondered why 1337 is a special number, that's why, because it actually spelled leet, and it meant that you were leet. At this time also, what you were doing was you were calling bulletin boards, either locally for free or long distance using other methods, and you were looking for software. Because everybody was trading games, right? The games weren't that big. They were like 140 kilobytes, but the modems were also slow too. And so if I was talking to Scott McCready and I bragged that I had 3-day software and he wanted to one-up me, he would say, well, I've got 2-day software. I got 2-day, man. I got 2-day. That's only been out for 2 days. I got it. I went to Babbage's and bought it the day it came out. But the best thing you could ever get was O-Day. 0-day meant it was unreleased. That's what David Lightman was looking for when he was breaking into that computer. He thought it was a game place, and so he actually was looking for O-Days. And where that term O-Day came from is where's BBS's, how long has it been around, right? And now, of course, it means an exploit that has never been patched or is unknown to the manufacturers. But at the time, what actually happened was 0-day meant that software that's not out yet. Now, when I was researching this, it was kind of funny, and I'll leave this to the reader to check out on their own. But actually, one of the programs that you could use to war dial an entire exchange very, very, very quickly was something called Tone Loc. And Tone Loc author actually showed up in the discussion, and he tells his life story, which I'm not going to get into so much here, but basically it goes BBSs, dumpster diving in phone places, going to prison, back to college, and then of course he started a security company. But that software issue was a way that you could learn programming. Okay, the easiest and stupidest thing you could do is slap your name on the splash page of somebody else's. And it is still kind of funny that people were putting their actual phone numbers on those splash pages, right, that were out there. But for me, it was a way to learn assembly language, right? I learned hexadecimal. Learn how to get around copy protection routines, really basic ones, right? Really mimicking, etc. Now, everybody always wanted to learn COBOL and Pascal, but come on, you're 14 years old. Who's going to spend that much time? But it was really about breaking that software, right? And so eventually, you would want to learn from others, and it formed into cracking groups. So all over the nation, you didn't have to be in the same NPA-NX, if you know what I mean. Groups like Fahrenheit 451 formed. Eventually Frozen Crew, and then something interesting happened. The cracking groups started to migrate to bigger things because software piracy was kind of lame. I mean, you didn't even play the games. They became hacking groups. Now, these hacking groups did not have the profit motive. They were more like kids having fun and had these crazy names that would scare the crap out of the FBI, like Legion of Doom, right? Or Cult of the Dead Cow, right? And by the way, Cult of the Dead Cow, you had to be really careful. You didn't want your mom to find those files because she might think you were in a cult. Okay, never mind what the cult was that was doing that. Now, CDC is, of course, world famous because they released Back Orifice and Back Orifice 2K, carrying around a speak and spell, right, at DEF CON, launching them into the audience that would actually give you control of anyone else's Windows machine. Now, another one was Stefan Andreas, okay, aka Uncle Dittmeyer, and he wrote the world's best freaking tool ever created. Now, I could go on for this section for another hour, but I've got more. So we're going to talk about the fourth generation. Now, some of you think we're still in the fourth generation, and we could be, but I'm going to argue that we're really in the fifth, and I'll get there in a second. But people could say, what date started the fourth, right? And some of you out there will say, this is the day that the fourth generation started.
Hack the planet!
Hack the planet!
It's not just something they do.
Sure this sweet machine's not going to waste.
Are you challenging me?
It's who they are.
I win, you wear a dress on our date.
And if I win, so do you.
They can crack any code. And get inside any system.
Hello? Mr. Gill, according to our records, you're dead.
What?
But this time...
Come here, look at this.
It's some kind of virus.
Unless $5 million is transferred to the following account, I will capsize 5 oil tankers. They just hacked the wrong guy.
Game's over.
Whoever wrote this needs somebody to take the fall.
He's about to commit the perfect computer crime.
You've created a virus that's going to cause a worldwide disaster?
And they're about to take the blame.
A hacker planted the virus. It's the perfect cover. We're being framed. Can we be allies? I don't play well with others. Oh, wow, we are fried. Okay, let's nail it.
No.
You're not good enough to beat me. Yeah, maybe I'm not, but we are.
They're the only ones who can prevent a catastrophe.
I know how to stop this guy. They'll trace you like that.
Are you nuts? Come at me!
Unlike any the world has ever seen.
Never send a boy to do a woman's job.
Hackers of the world unite. Cops on the building. I need more time.
This is the end, my friend. United Artists welcomes you to the new world.
I let that play a long time. He's just to let you know that was there a long time. So it was cheesy, right? It was campy. During the pandemic, okay, one of the best moments of my life is I got to spend 45 minutes with Sam Ismail, the creator of Mr. Robot, on a webinar that was like a sponsored thing or whatever. And I got to talk to him about everything. And if it weren't for hackers, there would be no Mr. Robot. But not because of the reason you think. He was infuriated by how badly people portrayed hackers in movies and the TVs and everything else, and wanted to have one that was super duper realistic, right? So we've got Congress and we've got the president passing ineffective laws, okay? We have the popular culture now thinking that everything is Angelina Jolie. Oh my God, that was the woman from The Sopranos, by the way. I don't know if anybody caught that. That was a psychiatrist from The Sopranos that was in that movie as well. But then something else happened. And this is a historic date. This is a date that you probably should remember. I mean, I actually do. It's May 19th, 1998. 5/1998, or in the UK, I guess that would be 19/5/98. What happened was, okay, so we didn't really talk about CDC, but we definitely didn't talk about Loft Heavy Industries, okay? And this was a group of people that hung out in Boston and were absolutely brilliant at so much stuff, right? It was a hacker collective. At first, it was a nonprofit, right? And they came up with so much stuff, right? And on May 19th, they actually got called in front of the Senate, okay? That's Brian Oblivion, John Tan, Kingpin, Mudge, okay, Weld Pond. That's Space Rogue and Stefan von Neumann. Almost every one of these is on Twitter, by the way. Now, the testimony was an hour. It was Fred Thompson, this movie star guy from Law and Order, that was asking all these kind of questions. But what's crazy about this session, and I encourage you to watch the full hour, was during this hour, there's like 7 things that happened during this hour for the first time that you would either recognize or roll your eyes at. They called them rock stars for the first time ever, right? He explained what a buffer overrun was for the first time ever. The guys from Loft had bragged that they could take down the entire internet in 30 minutes. And people were a little bit concerned about that, which it turned out he had a few different ways he could do it, but he was actually talking about BGP, right? So it's just absolutely amazing the things that happened in this session. And it's such a historic moment in the history of hacking. God, I wish I could show you this testimony because it was just so good, but there's no way you're going to sit through an hour. So last night I cut it down to 2 minutes. And here's 2 minutes of the testimony. Watch this carefully. It's real fast.
They'll be using their hacker names of Mudge, Weld, Brian Oblivion, Kingpin, Space Rogue, Tan, and Stefan. I hope my grandkids don't ask me who my witnesses were today, and especially in light of the fact that the Washington Post described you as rock stars of the computer hacking elite.
The person who breaks into the systems and undermines the network security, and that's what I do in my day job. Unfortunately, many times they would not improve the software until we actually went public with the findings.
Within 30 minutes, the 7 of you could make the internet unusable for the entire nation. Is that correct?
That's correct. Actually, one of us with just a few packets. Many of the problems that are out there that contribute to this lack of security are extremely simple. Buffer overflows are spottable in source code.
In your testimony that given 30 minutes, you might be able to render the internet unusable. So what can we do? What try to protect against that?
The one method of doing that we were referencing there are several. There are dozens of them actually. This is definitely a double-edged sword because when you give the information out,
right,
other people can figure out how to exploit it.
Yeah.
However, if you don't give the information out, the people out there can't protect themselves.
The first time some big company has been compromised because of this, that it may fix itself.
No, the problem did not fix itself at all. And it was at this time that the harmless pranks and the non-profit motive exploration stuff took a little bit of a nasty turn, and we started to see things that were either vindictive or that were illegal. And one of them became known as doxing, right? And so what doxing was, and sometimes it's spelled with an X, sometimes it's spelled with two X's. It's not a UK versus America thing. It's actually, however you spell it, somebody on Twitter is going to tell you spelled it wrong. But the origin was, if my name was, oh God, I got to pick a name, David Lightman, that was my hacker name, you could tell the world what school I went to, who my parents were, my social security number, and I would have to give up that name, right? That persona. I'd have to give it up because I've been doxxed, right? It was also associated with vigilantism as well. Now, doxing, of course, remains a very, very big issue. And I know that you think I'm going to make a joke about Brian Krebs, but I'm not. We're going to talk about carding, okay? Carding was also something that came along the scene at that point in time, and that was credit cards were insanely easy to fake, right? If you knew the Loon algorithm, which most people memorized, you could just generate a number and it would work. If you guys have ever seen the movie The Jerk, Steve Martin is like looking through this book of all the credit card numbers that don't work. Every other number that worked in a Loon system did that. And so people started carding services, right? Started stealing things, right? There was very, very specific ways, but it was really a dent compared to what it was later. This was also the first time we ever saw denial of service attacks. But the one that came along that has changed every single one of our lives was, now, we didn't talk about social engineering, okay? That's a whole nother talk. The history of social engineering is a completely different talk. But social engineering is when you use psychology to get somebody to do what you want, typically to give their credentials or their logins, right? Well, somebody at America Online, a hacker that wanted to pursue America Online, came up with the combination of electronic use with social engineering and wrote a Visual Basic program called AOL. And what you could do is you could send out 1,000 messages. You could change your username to AOL support desk, or maybe even desk with an extra K, right? And if you sent out 1,000 notes asking people for their login and password, 100 people would write you back, period. Okay, it was a 10% return rate on AOL. It was just ridiculous, right? You could ask them their credit card numbers. You could ask them their logins and passwords. And the reason that people wanted this is because it used to cost money by the hour to use these online services, right? And if you actually look at the tool, fish was actually still spelled with an F at the time, right? And you could even customize the letter. Hey, I'm with America Online. Due to a problem we lost vital information. Please give us your login and password. Now, the reason that this is so important is because at my company, we track the total number of breaches that we're involved in, incident reports and everything else like that. And it's still well over 90% start with a fish, right? Probably closer to 95, depending on how you actually looked at it. So this was when attacks started. People started stealing source codes. Okay, people started going after intellectual property. PII and credit card theft became a very profitable enterprise, right? The bots started showing up. We all lost the concept of privacy. Everyone did, right? This became the age of the breach, right? And then we started to see DDoS evolving with much more sophisticated timing attacks. But the worst part of all about stage 4 is the profit motive was driving it. And the profit motive is ultimately what drives probably our second biggest problem in the industry today, which is ransomware. Now, it wasn't just hackers at this point. It was criminals of any kind. And that actually included some reporters. There were reporters in England that figured out, well, they actually used a private detective to do this. If you set your caller ID to your own cell phone number, right, you could call your own cell phone number and get your voicemail, right? That's number one. Number two, most people didn't change their default PIN on their voicemail. Number 3 was every system, whether it was Orange or EE, had a dial-in number that you could dial in, let's say from a landline, and then put in your number, right? Well, it turns out if you called that number while spoofing that number, you had administrative rights and you could reset anyone else's. So there were 7 ways that voicemails could be hacked. And it became very, very prevalent. 2,200 people were in the media. It was this massive mess, right? And these were not sophisticated hackers at all. These were people that were pouring through voicemails and listening to it. Now, when I was doing this research, first of all, I was surprised at how many different ways you could do it. But there's still vulnerabilities on that. There's still ways that you can actually retrieve someone else's voicemail on one of the UK carriers today, right? And I'll leave the research to that to somebody else because I know that there's people out there. So that mainstreaming happened. And the hackers always knew ways that you could get to systems that were exploitable, right? But John Mattingly came along and he decided that we really should, if we want to expose IoT vulnerabilities, and we do, so that they'll be patched, why not build a search engine? Okay, and put that in the hands of everyone so that people can search. And even today, there are certain Shodan searches that when you tell the company you found it on Shodan, they assume that you broke into the network, etc., right? But Shodan was a revolutionary idea. Have I been pwned from Troy Hunt? Same exact thing, right? Most people that don't know the industry assume that those are malicious tools, but they don't understand how powerful they are for hardening our networks, right? In 2009, Chris, Jeff, Matt, Jack, and Travis got together and renamed security fringes to BSides. And BSides was designed to be decentralized. It was designed to be global. It was designed to expand the conversation, involve more people, and enable people to be a part of the discussion. So that's BSides, and that brings us to the 5th generation. Again, you could say we're still in the 4th, but I believe that we're in the 5th, and here's why. Script kiddies, organized gangs, insiders, people that were social engineered was nothing compared to when the nation states came along. Now, we can argue all day long about when this started, but for me, it was in 2011 with the launch of Stuxnet. Okay, Stuxnet was the most sophisticated cyber weapon of all time. You got to read Kim Zetter's book. Kim Zetter's book is so amazing. But Stuxnet did stuff that nobody had ever seen before. It was polymorphic. It was multi-platform. Okay, it could basically mutate. It could hop air gaps. It had multiple ways to get in and out. It was very specifically targeting only 2 nuclear reactors, right? It had amazing use of signed drivers. Okay, not spoofed, but signed drivers, so it looked legitimate to Microsoft, right? And it was designed to get in and ruin the centrifuges at 3 nuclear power plants. Okay, this is a peaceful nation launching a weapon against another peaceful nation's energy generation. The problem with Stuxnet is, of course, it got out. It spread all over the world. You can still see it today out there, right? Now, it didn't do harm because it was only focusing on those specific areas. But here's how it was covered at the time. In 2011, when this happened, this is how people talked about this big weapon.
Last year, a computer virus called Stuxnet was discovered lurking in the databanks of power plants, traffic control systems, and factories around the world. 20 times more complex than any previous virus code, it had an array of capabilities. Among them, the ability to turn up the pressure inside nuclear reactors or switch off oil pipelines, and Stuxnet could tell the system operators everything was normal. Unlike most viruses, Stuxnet doesn't carry the usual forged security clearance that helps viruses burrow into systems. It actually had a real clearance, stolen from one of the most reputable computer technology companies in the world. It exploited security gaps that system creators are unaware of. These holes are known as 0 days, and the most successful viruses exploit them. The details of a 0 day can be sold on the black market for $100,000. Stuxnet took advantage of 20 0 days. To shut down the centrifuges that spin nuclear material at Iran's enrichment facilities. Stuxnet was a weapon, the first to be made entirely out of code. The most important question may not be who designed it, but who will redesign it. The evolution has been so fast that 9 months after its detection, the first virus that could crash power grids or destroy oil pipelines is available online for anyone to download and tinker with. It's an open source weapon, and there's no way of knowing who will use it or what they will use it for.
Source weapon. And of course, adversaries started emulating it, right? It wasn't necessarily that it did damage, it was that it taught the bad guys how to do this. Now, the other response was that every single nation pretty much knew who did this, right? I mean, today we know for sure who did it. But it was a signal to the rest of the world that peaceful nations could attack other peaceful nations on cyber just with reckless abandon. There was no reason not to, right? And so every single country went from having only defensive cyber defenses to offensive, right? Well outside the Five Eyes, everybody started developing those. And as a result of that, we started seeing activity from what cybersecurity professionals call nation-state actors. Nation-state actors is a fancy way of saying financed by a government, okay? Could be the military, could be a third party, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, the one thing you need to know about nation-state actors is they are really, really, really good, okay, typically, but you never abbreviate this term, never. Okay, because if you abbreviate nation-state actors, people get confused and they think you're talking about a very, very, very specific one. So let's fast forward to November 24th, 2014. On November 24th, 2014, the employees at Sony Pictures Entertainment came in to work and found that their laptops had been destroyed and wiped, right? All because of a movie. A bad movie, actually. It wasn't even that good. But I'm not going to obsess about the movie or about Sony, but there's some big lessons that we can learn. The first lesson you can learn about Sony is asymmetry. Now, that's a military term that means I can do with 3 people what it takes you 300 people to defend, right? Right? So cyber defenses is an asymmetrical warfare. One kid with eternal time and eternal energy can do way more damage than 12 people can protect, right? And Sony's a perfect example of this because the person in charge of security at Sony Pictures Entertainment went to a magazine and told that magazine, hey man, I'm not going to spend $10 million to protect a $1 million loss, right? So he's actually on the record talking about the damage. Now, of course, we know the damage was way more than 10 million, right? It was closer to $1 billion. But here's another lesson. Risk assessment is sloppy. The other lesson about Sony Pictures Entertainment is alarms. They had 20,000 alarms going off. They had 4 different IDS systems. They had firewalls. They had Cisco. They had everything. But when you have that many alarms going off, what do? You turn them off, right? You ignore them. You need actionable intelligence. And it wasn't bad enough that they'd been penetrated multiple times. It wasn't bad enough that they'd been penetrated deeply, but they didn't even catch the exfiltration. Terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data. And the worst part was reputational damage, because it turns out all Sony Pictures employees had on their desktop an unencrypted, big-ass PST file. Okay, and that contained every email you'd ever sent and received, and it was trivial to basically open and read these like crazy, and eventually they actually started dumping them. Now, these emails were salacious, they were scandalous, they were horrible, right? This is the one that got Amy Pascal fired, right? Because she's rambling on and on about a movie involving Tom Cruise. It's really, really, really late at night, okay? So we started to see way beyond just Ashley Madison, reputational damage could be the worst thing you do to companies, right? It could even be worse than encrypting files that are there. The other thing that was interesting about Sony was the hackers, which was most likely either paid contractors or actually part of the Lazarus group, left us a file called bonus.rar. Now, don't you pretend like you don't know what an RAR file is. It's a compressed file, okay? But in that file was a list of passwords. And Sony's passwords were horrible. 11 people had Sony 123 as their password. They had been through audits, and the auditors had told them, you cannot use your username as a password. But they were overridden, and they passed compliance anyway. So tons and tons and tons of horrible passwords, right? Super duper easy and being reused. So President Obama goes on TV. He starts talking about security. Every newspaper's talking about security. Everybody's saying, we gotta have better passwords. We gotta have better cybersecurity. Everyone change all your passwords and get it locked down. Do you think anybody learned their lesson? Well, we don't have to wonder, because this guy went out and he asked people 3 weeks after Sony, and this is what he found.
Today, we sent a camera out on a Hollywood Boulevard to help people by asking them to tell.
Sorry, let me get that going again here.
Today, we sent a camera out on a Hollywood Boulevard to help people by asking them to tell us their password. And this is how that went.
We're talking about cybersecurity today and how safe people's passwords are. What is one of your online passwords currently?
It is my dog's name and the year I graduated from high school.
Oh, what kind of dog do you have?
I have a Chihuahua Papillon.
And what's its name?
Jameson.
Jameson. And where did you go to school?
I went to school back in Greensburg, Pennsylvania.
What school?
Hempfield Area Senior High School.
Oh, when did you graduate?
In 2009.
Oh, great.
It's like my cat's name and then just like a random number.
Okay. Has you had this cat for a while?
Yeah, she's my childhood pet.
Aw. And what's her name?
Her name is Jolie.
Jolie.
Mm-hmm.
So like a password of yours would be Jolie and then a number.
Yeah.
Like number 1?
Like my birthday.
Oh, when is your birthday?
June 12th.
Oh, nice. And what year were you born?
95.
Oh, great.
Mm-hmm.
So Jolie, 6, 12, 95.
Yes.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
So you mean to give my password right now? No, I cannot do that.
But we all want to know what it is so we can tell you if it's strong or not.
Oh my goodness. Let me think. Okay, one is Tel Aviv. Yeah. 468. And then Israel. It's only 3, but it's for me it's strong enough.
Ireland, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Gemma, 1, 2, 3. Spelled Gemma.
He's going to spell it for us, actually, to be specific. Now, we know who did the Sony Pictures Entertainment breach, right? We know, right? There's some of these that we know for a fact. With attribution, you always say I speak with a high degree of confidence. But in this particular one, there was a lot of evidence, there was a lot of insider evidence, and there was a lot of the same mechanisms that they used. Now, Lazarus is still very active in stealing cryptocurrency because North Korea used to manufacture counterfeit dollars. But why futz with that when you can just steal Bitcoins all over the world, right? Billions and billions of them that are there. That's like their main way of raising money. If you're a member of this group, you get to keep 20% of whatever you steal, right? And I will tell you, if you're interested in these APTs and in these governments and whatever else, one fantastic resource that I've found to figure out who's who is apt.threattracking.com. It's just a Google Doc, like a really, really big Google Doc, that is actually kept up to date every single day, that lists, the actual people that did this and everything else. Now, we talk about the Lazarus Group, and we certainly talk about Russia, but at first, when we talked about APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats, we talked about China. They were named APT-1, right? And China has very specific things that they do. And for those of you that don't know, the People's Liberation Army 61398 is housed in this apartment complex in Shanghai with millions of miles of fiber and all kinds of backup electricity that's out there. And if you pull up as a reporter and try to get footage of it, this is what's going to happen if you actually try to video it.
From U.S. cybersecurity firm Mandiant, they say a hacking collective with direct ties to the Chinese military has stolen data from 141 organizations from around the world since 2006. The CNN crew tried to roll their cameras through that neighborhood. And this is what they discovered. This is our crew being chased by Chinese security officers.
Chase after us just yet.
Never slow down, by the way. Never slow down.
Keep driving. Drive away. Drive away. Drive away. Drive away. Drive away. Not stop.
CNN's David McKenzie is live for us in Shanghai with more. Walk me through.
So, we know some of the things that China does. One of the things that they do is they don't really weaponize what they take. And one of the biggest breaches in North America was something that was known as the OPM, okay? And what that was, and it was really, really painful, was it wasn't just my information. It was also anybody that I gave as a reference to get a security clearance, right? So if you listen to your neighbor, your psychiatrist, your doctor, whatever, right? It was all their personal data too, and it was basically just scoffed up, right? Millions and millions and millions of records.
Quote, a treasure trove of information about everybody who has worked for, tried to work for,
there's all kinds of secrets about people that don't, that you would want secrets over, right? And it had the marks of China all over it as well. Now, the reason we know that it wasn't North Korea is because they would have probably dumped it to the world to cause damage, right? Whereas China just kind of hoards that. And that's why I knew immediately when Equifax happened that it was China as well. Because it wasn't really sold, right? It had all the hallmarks of China. And I think we could say with about 90% certainty that it was China at this point in time. But it was a massive breach. The beer farmers talked about it during the Open. It was absolutely huge, okay? And this is the most important information as an American citizen that you could ever have. It was your tax information. It was your address. Millions and millions of people, right? And we're numb. We're numb to the breaches. They just get worse and worse and worse. But then the game changed. The game changed because the Russians figured out that you could change the world with the right breach. You could actually break in and get a hold of incriminating information, and you could change or try to change the outcome of an election. Now, the way they got in, guess what? Was it all started with a fish. Now, I know it's fashionable to tell everybody, let's blame the users because of their stupidity for clicking these, but the Podesta fish was really, really, really good, okay? If you actually look at it, you'll see that they actually encoded his Google profile photo in there. The URL looks pretty real. He wondered if it was real. He forwarded it to his IT guy. His IT guy said, set your password back. But what his IT guy didn't tell him was don't use that bit.ly address down there, right? And once they were into Podesta, they could get their tendrils into all kinds of other stuff. And there is no debate that this was Russia. None. Zero. There is one person on the entire planet that doubts that this was Russia. Period. We know because Grizzly Step was released, okay, with very, very extensive unclassified intelligence, talking about how APT 28 and 29 were actually banging into each other, right? They were in the RNC as well, which is the other side. And all of that really reached a Plymouth when one night, as a cybersecurity professional, you're sitting at home and you see the most surreal moment of your entire life.
You're saying Russia, 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 but I don't, maybe it was. I mean, it could be Russia, but it could also be China. It could also be lots of other people. It also could be somebody sitting on their bed that weighs 400 pounds, okay?
Now, I can afford to lose a little bit of weight, but let's not call me 400 pounds, okay? We were not particularly happy with that. But then something else happened. The Russians doubled down because, let me back up for a second. When somebody hits you with cyber, you have three ways you can respond, okay? You have to respond. You can respond kinetically, meaning you can launch missiles and the world can end. You can respond with sanctions, which we tried to do, or you can respond with cyber, right? Cyber for cyber, right? Proportionate response. Well, Russia wasn't really interested in that, and the U.S. really wasn't that interested in that either at the time because we really didn't know how much damage they could do. So ultimately what happened next was the shadow brokers came across the scene. And according to Edward Snowden, they were basically trying to tell the world, hey, if you retaliate on us on cyber, we have a ton of other shit we can release. We have evidence that you might be spying on some of your allies, even the Five Eyes guys, right? We have all of these implants, etc. And so for maximum effect, we're going to pretend like this isn't Russia, and we're going to dump them to the world. Now, these were extremely advanced cyber weapons, right? I mean, there were pieces of code that could let you take over any Cisco router at all, right? And of course, it was all tied to what they called equation group, One of the most potent weapons, period, was actually pretty simple. It's an SMB-based weapon known as Eternal Blue. And when we saw that, we were like, whoa, you can basically pwn any Windows machine, right? You got to weaponize it a little bit. And guess what happened with that? That weapon that was designed for cyber warfare between nation states became WannaCry. And WannaCry, because we're talking to a British audience, was ultimately stopped, whether you like it or not, by Marcus Hutchins. Now, I know that that's a controversial figure, right? I know people have different opinions about him. But I've met him. I've spent time with him. I think he's a brilliant guy. And Emily Krause, on my podcast, made a big point about empathy is one of the most important things you can do in cybersecurity. And casting stones on people for what they did when they were a minor is not showing empathy, right? Who among us can first cast the first stones? But I highly encourage you to read this article in Wired. It just came out like a month ago. Oh my God, it came out 4 months ago, right? And get his opinion, and then maybe form your own opinions about that. So, fifth generation defense. We're now defending against script kiddies, a possible labor shortage, sophisticated cyber games, and nation states, right? And we've got magic bullets, right? We got magic bullets. We've been hearing about this for 2 days. We're going to fix it with machine learning and AI. No, we're not. Absolutely not. Because the problem is the non-artificial intelligence. Stop me if you've seen this one before. Multi-million-dollar cybersecurity budget, right? Rock solid. Password reuse. And depending on who you ask, as much as 70% of people are using passwords over and over and over. Now, we know the answer, right? We do. Everybody knows. Everybody on this call knows. It's simple. It's easy. It's basic hygiene. We need unique, strong passwords. We need patch hygiene. We need antivirus. We need multi-factor everywhere. We need situational awareness on phishing. But here's the problem. Even if we solve all of that, there's a bigger problem that we're facing too. And that is influence operations. And that is actually psychology being designed to manipulate people, to cause discord, to cause fights, right? Basically to cause chaos. And the more we look into this, the more we realize these are coordinated efforts. And a lot of times, they may not be on the side that you think, right? In the case of Brexit, there was a ton of propaganda being generated by Russia on both sides, right? On both sides, both remain and leave, right? But they do follow the same tactics. And this is going on right now. Right now today, it's going on about COVID-19, for example. And I would actually argue that it's going on in our industry. There are people, agents of chaos, that are designed and that relish in causing to stir shit up, right? We definitely know that Facebook is worse for you than smoking. Giving up Facebook will give you a better life than giving up smoking, right? But it's ripe with examples everywhere. And it wasn't just Brexit, it was a Dutch referendum, it was the German elections. Back when AIDS was a thing, a group of Russians decided to try to convince a bunch of Americans that AIDS was created by the CIA, right? This is extremely well documented in this book, right? And today, they're spending not really that much money for the effect they're getting to cause people to fight about masking, about shutdowns, about blaming China. And the hallmarks for all of this, and this could be Russia, it could be trolls, okay? It could be anybody that's saying, we want to destroy the industry from within, is come with a little nugget of history, find yourself a useful idiot, deny everything, and keep your hand hidden. So I do want to close, because I'm almost out of time, with another history lesson, and then also to tell you what you need to do next, or actually to ask you a call to action, right? But in order to do that, I need to do another history lesson, and I'm definitely going to get a drink of water here. In Manchester, in 2017, Mike wrote about seeing Ian Thornton Trump talk, okay? And he said, 1, I'm doomed, I need a blanket. And B, I'm not having this shit, let's do something about it, right? And that actually was kind of the origin and the start of an organization that became known as the Beer Farmers, right? Mike, John, Ian, Scott, and Sean today. They have InfoSec Happy Hour. They have nonprofits. And they have the phrase, here for you. Here for you, right? Here for you is not a discriminatory idea or anything else like that. Here's something else that happened. Because I was familiar with them. Definitely was in the Mini Hats Club. Knew about Meadow. But 2 years ago today, 2 years ago today, September 5th, 2018, I got a message from not Meadow and CyberSec Stu, and basically decided that I would change my flight to coach so that we could go to the first ever Mini Hats Club meetup, and hopefully I could convince Stu that we really need to pour some of this into nonprofits and raise the money for charities, which was easy to do, absolutely easy to do. Now, since meeting the Beer Farmers and the Mini Hats Club, I've never had a single lunch or dinner alone in any city in England, period, right? And one of the things that's the craziest, and I promised everybody I would tell this story the last time, was I social engineered, or did privilege escalation anyway, my way to become a staff member. I was a staff member of Mini Hats Club for 42 days before Stu realized it and then kicked my ass out. And this is exactly the moment that it happened. And I'm not gonna show you the audio, but what ultimately it is that Stu and Dylan are telling a funny story. And I convinced him that file permissions on my mobile app really required me to have staff to upload a file quite of that size. So that's how I became staff at the Mini Hats Club. And, you know, bringing this back always to the beginning about Jake and Ian's piece about is there five or six generations of hacking? Over the last few days when I was preparing this, I came to the conclusion, is there 5 generations of hacking? There's 5 generations of hackers, right? We can count those people as different generations of hackers. And what I would like to propose to you is that the 6th generation starts right now, okay? And I listened to a lot of the sessions over the last few days, and I picked out things that I think should be characteristics of the 6th generation if you'd like to join it. Number 1, here for you, quit repeating history, especially involving Russia, right? Number 2, don't blow up that we have a skills shortage. That was Beer Farmers. Channy Sims gave an amazing talk, but the one thing I really took out of that was that diversity is strength. And any of you that have ever had a red team knows you have to have people of different backgrounds. You have to have people of different races. You have to have LGBTQI, different abilities, and neurodivergence. If you give me a team that is massively diverse against a team of all white guys, that first team is going to kick that second team's ass every single time. Okay, diversity is good for us. We shouldn't just do it because it makes us feel good, right? It's actually selfish to do this. And of course, we know InfoSec needs more women. The pipeline is not nearly full enough, and we're also scaring the shit out of them with toxicity that we shouldn't. And I think the answer here is mentors. Every single person should be a mentee and a mentor. There is nobody that wouldn't benefit from that. And I was convinced by that by Tanya Janka. If you don't know Tanya Janka, she runs We Hack Purple, okay, and Cyber Mentor Mondays. Everybody can benefit from mentors that are out there. Now, Sean Wright said, hey, you can't fix what you don't know. And that really brought me back to the idea that, which by the way, that Sean, that was awesome. It was early for me. It was like 3 a.m. But that really brought me back to the fact that if you want to become a CISO, okay, you need 3 things. And number 1 or number 2 is you need to learn empathy. You will never succeed as a CISO without empathy. And one of my favorite talks in the world is by somebody named InfoSec Sherpa, Tracy Malif, okay? And she actually talks about how to get that empathy. You have to be able to put yourself in the user's perspective, in the criminal's perspective, maybe even the police officer's perspective, right? Because empathy is an actual game changer for your performance. So we have the tools. We know what we can do. I'm calling on us to hack the InfoSec community, to smash the gates, okay? Once those gates are smashed, lower the ladder, help newbies out. Let's get rid of bigotry and harassment. Let's build up diversity and inclusion, and let's do it all. Now, I know some of you are going, holy shit, Ray. I thought this was a history of hacking, man. Now you're just getting preachy. But are you up for it? Are you? I want to give you I'm going to close with the wise words of one of the most brilliant poets in InfoSec history. And he said, here we go. No telling what's next. Life's up and down. You never know what you'll get. Be prepared when you're put to the test, because you got to step up. You got to stand above the rest. And that, of course, is YT Cracker. Do we have any questions? Do you guys have any questions? Sean, I can't hear you if you're talking.
Hang on, sorry, I'm unmuting the entire room.
Oh boy, that's going to be loud. Okay.
Oh, no. They're allowed to unmute themselves now, is what I mean.
Okay, sure. Does anybody have any questions? Somebody throw me a softball.
Ray, do you want to drop the slides so that we can get the room up if people want to come on video as well? Assuming.
Yes, I just want to make sure that everybody saw the messages that I snuck in on this final slide.
I totally love you.